Hey everybody, what's going on? This is John here with the Hero Academy, and today I have a special episode for you guys where I want to be talking about the advantages of going to whether it's networking events, conferences, and industry meetings that are relative to your business. Now, for myself, I just recently came back from a mastermind and leadership conference in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. It was my first time ever actually being in Mexico. I've never been there before, and so I didn't know what to expect. But nonetheless, from the conversations that I'd had with some of the past attendees that had been there, as well as the organizer, I was very much excited to go there. And I've never been, I should also say, I've never even been to a mastermind conference. And so even that was something that was new to me. And so for me, that experience was tremendous because not only did I learn from people who were there before, but I was also in the room or in the presence of industry leaders, business leaders, people who are much bigger than I am in terms of their agencies that have been doing things and that have learned things that I am just coming across or have yet to come across. And so the reason why, I kind of want to start off with using that as an example is because, for one, I've never been to something like that. And not that I've never heard of that. It's just that I've not placed a priority on going or seeking a type of event like that. One of the bigger advantages that came out of that was something that it was set up to be a week-long conference. A lot of the conferences that I've been to before, if not most of them, are if not a day, let alone or up to maybe 2 or 3 days at the most. But typically, they're within a proxy to where it's like you attend the event and you're there at the conference for a couple of hours of a day, and then you leave. You retreat back to your hotel room. Maybe you'll get dinner or some drinks with some people that you may have met or people that you know. But essentially, you still come back to something that is somewhat familiar, or at least you come back into yourself. For me, in that conference, it was completely different because I was totally immersed in an environment that I'd never been in before. I had all these great amenities of a 5-star resort, and I also had a roommate. And while the conference itself had talks that were in the morning, that went throughout the morning until about lunchtime, there was everything was structured. So there was a time, there was the speakers that had about a couple hours in the morning from, let's say, about 8 to 12, and then there was a function for lunch. So while you were having lunch, you were with different people for that moment of time, and then in the afternoon there was like a breakout session where everybody kind of got together, and all of this was while you're in the pool. So that in itself was also unconventional, but once you were done with that, then there was another break where you got together, or you retreated back, showered, came back together, and then there was another little almost like a cocktail hour, if you will, and then there was dinner, and that was structured with a certain amount of people or a certain group of people, and then it was a matter of after hours. So I mean, after dinner, it was kind of like downtime, and still we all kind of congregated together every single night. And so that in and of itself was really, really cool. And so that was kind of the format every single day for several days. Now, for me, completely different to any other experience that I've ever been to when it comes to conferences. And I want to, give you guys that as an example to say, if you have not attended a mastermind conference, even if it's for a day, I highly suggest that you do, because there's so much that you're going to get out of it just by being in the room or just by being next to people that are in your industry that may be different at different areas of your industry. Maybe they're providers, suppliers, merchandisers, whatever, creatives, whatever that may be. But they all have different perspectives in terms of engaging in your industry, and there's so much that you can learn from them. And probably chances are you may know them or know of their business or of their company, but maybe not have ever had an opportunity to sit down and talk with them. And that's what I had, where I don't know that I would have had that in any other means. Yes, there's social media, and yes, there's online forums or whatnot, but in that sense, being able to actually be face to face with somebody is something that no matter how much social media will have, that's something that I don't think will ever go away. The genuine, having a genuine conversation and seeing somebody's reaction to your questions or to your feedback is something that I think will never go away. I think it's awesome to have that, and I hope that it never goes away, because I think that you can really tell and gauge whether or not that person is intuitive in terms of what they're saying, whether or not they really do understand the industry, and also their perspective on different things. And that's something that I don't know that you can get outside of being face-to-face in a setting like that. Now, when you come out of that into traditional conferences, like I said, where you kind of go in there for a couple of hours a day and then you kind of walk away, whether it's in your hometown or whether you travel to it, what happens is that as soon as you walk away and you leave that conference center or whatever the venue is, there's like, while you're there, you're charged up and you're excited because you're learning new things. But then as you walk away, almost as soon as you walk out of the door, you're kind of reminded instantly of like all the different things that you have to do or that you would normally do around this time. Maybe it's catching back up with family. Maybe it's checking in with emails. Maybe it's doing some other projects or whatever that it is. But a lot of that allure kind of falls away almost immediately. And so if you have the opportunity to go away to something, or if you even are away at one of these typical conferences, if you can, give yourself some time to come away from that and decompress, maybe alone, or maybe it is with a partner, if you've gone with a partner, and really soak in what you've taken in. Dissect it a little bit more instead of like going right back into your routine, where you kind of like take what you've learned, put it on the shelf, and then say to yourself, okay, I'll get to this later. I'll focus on this later. Or even if you've taken notes and it's like, oh, I'll get back to these notes later. Take the time to do it then and there, because more time than not, the distractions will start to come in, and before you know it, it'll be the next day, and there's new things that you have to learn, new things that you've been exposed to, and you probably won't make time for you to get back to the things that you just kind of experienced the day before, and instead now taking in new things, and then again you might do the same thing at the end of that day and kind of shelf all that stuff for another time. Now, let me go back into what are some main things that you can get out of going to conferences and meetings and things like that. Number one would be meeting industry leaders. So these are people who are who have probably at the top of your industry in terms of businesses or in terms of companies. Maybe they're CEOs of well-known companies that have been in the business for many years. And so maybe they're there. And a lot of times they're there as keynote speakers. They're there as presentational speakers, and sometimes they'll even be walking around or have a booth where you can actually engage with them. I highly recommend that you do. A lot of times when it comes to networking and it comes to conferences, some of us are more introverted and feel like, stepping out and asking someone, to talk to them, or like kind of being, we may get stage fright or we may get starstruck or whatever and may not engage. And I can tell you that if you've paid the money to be there, and they're there, chances are they're willing to talk to you and they're willing to meet with you. And it's not like they're willing to sit, spend all their time with you, but at the very least, chances are they're looking forward to meeting with you. And if, at the very least, they're looking forward to hearing, I say at the very most, what they're probably looking forward to the most is to hear what you have to say, especially if it's something that may be controversial to what maybe they have said, or something that's constructive to what maybe their approach is to business. They'll be happy to hear that and probably offer some really good insight right back to you on the spot. Along from that, just by having that interaction with them, you probably can then, have a much more softer approach to connecting with them later on via email, maybe via LinkedIn or something like that. Or even maybe seeing how you can work your way into the company to have some kind of partnership or agreement. Having them as that contact point is huge. And I don't know that you can have that experience outside of somebody kind of walking you into their building and setting up a meeting for you that already knows them and then knows you. Right? So, again, meeting industry leaders is probably a great option or a great feature to going to a conference that's within your industry. The next thing would be to you have an upfront view of your competition. You can see what's working for them, see what's not working for them, and then also kind of gauge yourself to see, hey, this is what my competition is doing. If I'm not a vendor or have a booth at this conference, or have a structure or a setup at this conference, maybe next year, since it's the first year that I'm going, next year I'm going to have something and I'm going to do this, that instead, because that way I'm going to get more engagement. I'm going to be positioned at the more closer to the entry doors where people are coming in, so that way people can see my area or my booth first, and I can engage with them instead of being in the back of the hall or someplace off where there's less traffic. There's a whole lot of different things that I can kind of get into. But seeing your competition is awesome, no matter what level that you are. Maybe you're just starting out and, your competition has several employees, maybe, they have several locations and things like that. There's still a way for you to be able to make an impact in your industry, even if it is just you. More times than not, companies who have several hundred employees or even, several employees, more times than not, they kind of get stuck in what they're doing in kind of their own process or their own business, and they sometimes get complacent. And what's nice about having a digital world that we're in right now is that the playing field for us to kind of get in, or the barriers to entry, are not as high as they were, let's say, 20, 30 years ago. If you do have a unique approach and you do have a unique product or service, you can really permeate the market. And they are also there, your competition are also there to kind of see you as well. Whether they're maybe trying to reach out to you directly when they see you, or maybe they've noticed your branding, they've noticed your logo and things like that, and they see you, they want to have a conversation with you, or at the very least to see how you move and see what you're doing, so that way they can kind of analyze and see, hey, should we treat them as a threat as we thought, or maybe now that we see them, oh, they're here, oh wow, they really are a threat, we need to adjust what we're doing, or maybe we need to engage or whatever. So really have that in mind when you walk in there, is to kind of really look to see what people are doing, identify your competition, see what's working for them, and see what you would do different, especially if you're planning on exhibiting into the conference the next year that it comes around. The next thing that I want to highlight is exposure and network with affiliates and peers. This is a big one too. For me, a lot of the conferences that I go to are WordCamp conferences that happen all around the world. And while for me, is in terms of that's my industry, or one of the industries that I'm active in, there's a lot of colleagues that I've met along the years that are very active in this community as well, and they're very active in a lot of these conferences. So a lot of times for me, just going is very fun because I get to see them. So I'm not walking in not knowing anybody or anything. Chances are I'm going to meet probably about 20 or 30 people that I've met over the years, or met over time, or even just met on social media, and we've had conversations on social media where it's like, oh wow, we've been having some great dialogue. Great to finally meet you up front in person, and then having some conversations, maybe even continuing those conversations that we've had online, continuing them in person. And I can't tell you how valuable that is, especially if you have questions. Again, they may not be competition, but you can ask them questions in terms of, hey, what's been working for you? How did you solve this? Or how do you deal with this? Or I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think my approach should be? I've been thinking about signing up for this service. I saw that you've been using it for a little while. What's been your experience with that? Is it worth it for me to get into based on what from me or whatnot? There's so many questions that you can kind of get into just by being there, that having that dialogue in person. There's so much more that you can kind of flesh out, or you can kind of ask and get into, versus being online and having conversations online that are kind of like one at a time, or conversations that are maybe here and there. They're spotty. They're sporadic is the word I was looking for. All right. The next thing that I want to talk about is learn and meet with the vendors and suppliers. A lot of times when it comes to conferences, those that are industry specific, especially, there's vendors that are there that could be like you and I, but there also could be suppliers that are there that supply products and services into that industry that are supplementing, right? For me, for example, one of the suppliers that I met, or vendors that I should say that I met when I was in Mexico, was Brad from GoWP. And while I met him before at the previous WordCamp here in Orlando, we kind of talked. We didn't really get into a conversation. Whereas when I was there, for the week, we actually got into some really good conversations where we talked about, what his product, what his service is, and how the products within his service and within his company can really help what I'm doing with my customers and my business, where I wouldn't have had that conversation with him outside of being immersed in that environment. And what was also great about that was that we were able to carry that conversation and carry that relationship outside of that. So where we've been sharing some emails back and forth. We're, matter of fact, getting ready to see each other again at WordCamp US at the end of this week. All of that is awesome, but I can attribute that to not the fact that I know that he's available online as well as I am through different channels, but the fact that I actually was able to sit down and meet with him and actually have some time to talk to him and get his full attention, that's just awesome. And I can't tell you, what that means to me and what that could mean for you if you had, a supplier or vendor that you were able to sit down and talk with. Because again, they're there for the same reasons, to meet with you as a potential buyer or a potential customer of theirs as well. That's all within that same industry. The next thing is self-promotion. Being at an industry conference or meeting is great for you as a business owner, because you get to self-promote. Now, you don't want to be one of those people that kind of walks in there and just starts handing out business cards left and right at everybody, you lock eyes with. You really want to have conversations with people. You want to be able to, gauge what's kind of happening. There's usually like groups of people that are kind of talking, whether they're in circles or whether they're in around a table or things like that, maybe in the hallways where, as you're crossing or as you're walking by, you can kind of see, hey, I know this one person, maybe I can stop here and engage in this conversation. And then through the conversations, you can see where you can add value. It's no different than kind of being online where, someone may post a question about something, and then instead of you just kind of hounding them with your products or services, you provide value by answering the question for them. If there's a need for you to refer back to your website where they can get more information, so be it. Same thing that you would do in an actual conversation. You'd be there answering the questions for them and say, hey, but you know what? You probably need a walkthrough on this. I actually created a 10-page walkthrough that shows you step by step exactly how to do this. If you just visit my website, go here and you can have access to that, and it'll really help you out, but at the very least, I could, I've answered your question by just telling you to do this, right? And so that's a good way of providing value. A little bit of self-promotion there, but not in the way that's like spammy or like overbearing in terms of like, hey, here's what I do. You need to sign up with me. You need to buy. That's not what it is at all. You've been listening to the conversation, listening to what the challenges or the needs were, and you're able to provide value. Okay. Now, the last thing, and this is probably the biggest thing, is education. There's so much to learn. There's so much to see. There's so much to engage with. You really want to go there with a notepad or maybe even a note-taking device. Maybe even have your cell phone ready. Have your your video on, and maybe take some video while you're there. Maybe have your audio recorder on so that way you can listen in on conversations and save those so that way you can go back and dissect them later. Maybe it's during a presentation. You just have your phone and you're taking screenshot or pictures of screenshots of different presentations. I've seen I've seen it all. I've seen people bring in their own cameras and set them up right in front of them so that way they can record the session and then go back and watch it later on for so that way they can dissect that themselves. There's also an opportunity for you to find out about new apps, new tools. Maybe there's new regulations that are coming down and within your industry, maybe new laws, whatever that it is. All of these things are ways for you to kind of learn about that, because it's going to be, the climate is going to be very, very rich of all these different conversations where you may not be privy to that through the social channels or through the blogs and other websites that you may follow. Even if they're from your competition, you may not be able to get all of that, and you may not be able to get controversial comments on things that are happening. So, for example, maybe there's a new device that came out, and maybe it's a new drone for me, in my business with photography. Maybe it's a new camera or something like that, and sounds great. I really want to. Maybe it's from a brand that I really like, and I really want to get into it. But then maybe I talk to a colleague of mine, and they're like, "Yeah, I heard about that, and did you notice it has this, that, and the third? And because of that, it's really not worth it, because if you get this other camera, if you already have this." It already has those features in it. So really, that's not necessary to kind of spend this extra money on this device or on this camera or whatever that it is, or this app, because this can do it for free, or this can do it for a lot less, or this is much less buggier than using this new one that just came out. Or I was just talking to another fellow colleague of all of ours, and they've been using this for the last month, and it was fantastic, and it saved them time, and it saved them money or whatever. So highly recommend that you try it, right? And so having that feedback from a colleague or from somebody that's right there with you could really, make a big impact for you, instead of you trying to read reviews and trying to, do your own research online and making a guess, which is fine by the most part, but getting that, that feedback right then and there from somebody and engaging that off of their interactions is fantastic. Okay. So that's all that I have for you guys today in terms of just a few things on ways that you can kind of capitalize on going to industry networking events, masterminds, and conferences. There's a great way to kind of find out about them if you're looking for it. You can Google it, but create a Google alert for conference and maybe your city. For example, conference Orlando, and then that way every time a new conference is or something is published with conference and Orlando, you'll get a Google alert sent to your email, and you can check that out. Or maybe you just use a Google alert for conference and your industry, or conference and a product, or conference and a couple of keywords, just to see what comes up. You'd be surprised. Like I typically, when I first started going to conferences, it was only local conferences because that's all that I could do. That's all that I could do. But then I started to travel to conferences that were outside of my city, outside of my our area, to around the state, and then outside of my state. And all of those bring different dynamics, and I think that they're great exposure for you all around. And they're great for you to, kind of gauge again, what is it that you're doing, and compare that to what your competition is doing, compare that to what your colleagues are doing, and what's going on in the industry. So if you guys have that are watching here on live as well as on the replay, if you've been to a couple of conferences for your industry and you have some other tips, I'd love to hear about them. You can definitely leave them in the comments below, and let's kind of dialogue there. And until the next time, guys, I'll see you soon. Bye.